Hi everyone, my name is Audrey Galina and I'm the owner of Simply Be Counseling. This is our first series in the Parent Academy class number 1, and I'm sitting here with Galina Lipkin, our primary child therapist at Simply Be. And the first class, what we are going to be focusing on today is school refusal and the continuum of that, everywhere between a young person or even a teenager not going to school and hiding out in their bedroom, refusing to leave the house, all the way up into just being anxious to get in the car or get out of bed because they feel like they have worries about school. So I'm going to ask a couple of questions with Galina, and we're just going to talk about the things that you should know and to kind of help your child. So one of my first questions is, what are some reasons why kids would not want to go to school?
So I think there could be a number of reasons why a kid might not want to go, and this could be anything from anxiety about grades, social anxiety, depression, bullying, a number of different things. And the more that we learn about the reason why they don't want to go, the better we can come up with an effective solution.
Okay, and so what if they're talking about physical pains like headaches or stomach aches? What do we do about that?
So headaches and stomach aches are two of the most common physical symptoms that I see when kids come in for any sort of anxiety. Our bodies are amazing communicators in letting us know that something around us doesn't feel right. And this can also include heart palpitations, feeling really hot or really cold or kind of shaky. But headaches and stomach aches in kids are two of the most common symptoms of anxiety. And so aside from getting any sort of medical condition ruled out, because we always want to make sure that there's nothing medically going on, it's just really an indicator that anxiety is there. You'll also notice that a lot of times in kids with school anxiety, that anxiety doesn't exist on weekends, or it kind of goes away when the kids realize they don't have to go to school.
Okay, so an indicator would be that if on the weekends they're bouncing out of bed, going to friends' houses, doing well, but then come Sunday night, they get those, what I call Monday scaries, and then they're not able to function like at the same level that they had been that weekend.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And if your child is complaining of a stomach ache for 2 days in a row, and you think it's a stomach ache at first, like a real illness, but then you start to realize it's not, I mean, what do you do? Like, do you make them go to school even though they're saying that their stomach hurts?
So that's the thing with anxiety. It kind of runs on a cycle, and the more you avoid the thing that you're afraid of, such as school, the more it teaches your brain that there's actually something to be afraid of, and it's something that should continue to be avoided. So as much as you can get your kid to go to school, it really kind of reteaches the brain that I can be uncomfortable even though I have to go to school, and I can survive that.
So it teaches them that despite the discomfort, they can push through it. And worst case scenario, your kid really is sick and they go to school and they're really sick and the nurse calls you and they come home.
Right.
So it's okay to not be perfect in this. It's okay to kind of push them and then be wrong, because as a parent I would be nervous to send my kid to school because I thought it was one thing and then they're actually sick. I would have a lot of guilt about that.
Yeah, especially if it's something new and you don't know, is it anxiety, is it physical? I mean, yeah, there's a little bit of trial and error with that.
And is it helpful to talk to the nurse or the teacher? I mean, what kind of communications would be helpful in that situation?
I mean, I think it would be important to let them know, like, hey, my kid isn't feeling great today, or if you already know it's anxiety, kind of talking to them and saying these are some of the things that are happening, and then kind of working from there, because the school might also have an effective solution too.
Okay, so really including the school in the early stages of it and not letting it kind of grow to a point where they have to get involved because there's accommodations that need to be made or things like that.
Right.
I know that one time when I was working with a client who had refusal of school, when we talked to the social worker, the first step was that instead of visiting his locker, he would visit her right out the gate at 8 a.m. And that was really helpful because she would kind of coach him to get moving through his day. So sometimes schools are really flexible with younger children and kind of work through this with families, right?
Yeah, the reality is that they've dealt with this a number of times, and with communicating with them, they could probably give you a number of ideas that they've used before that have been really effective for other kids and could be really helpful for someone else who's struggling too.
And what if they still don't go? That you know this is anxiety, you know that they need to go because they've watched this video and they're still not going, or they're very late to school. What's next?
So one of the approaches to that is to make staying home a much less attractive option. And so kind of setting and enforcing the expectation that if they're not going to go to school and engage academically at school, that they're engaging academically at home in some way. So that's saying, no phones all day, no TV, no napping all day, no video games, and encouraging them to continue working on homework or some sort of project that they have, or reading a book. And in that way, it doesn't fully reinforce the anxiety by letting them stay home. And of course, it keeps them up to date on their schoolwork. And at the same time, it makes staying home a less attractive option.
Mm-hmm. Would you recommend therapy at that point?
At that point, if there are consistent days of school refusal, it could be a really helpful option, because at that point you can take a much more individualized approach, meeting with a therapist and figuring out exactly what might be bothering your child and kind of how to help them through that.
Yeah, I guess I want to also normalize that for parents too, because in my experience, I have noticed that parents think that they should have all of these answers when their kid starts to refuse school, and that's definitely not in the parent handbook. That's not something that we expect in terms of normal development. And so when it gets out of our scope of parenting, it's okay to ask for help and really try to figure it out. Why do you think parents may wait too long to go to therapy or get help when there's a good case of evidence that the kid is struggling to go to school because of emotions or anxiety?
So I think every parent wants the best for their kids and wants to believe that their child is okay. And so I think sometimes there's just this, maybe it'll just go away. And sometimes it does. Sometimes it's a really hard week, or sometimes there's just a fight with a friend, and sometimes there's just a few really hard days to go to school and then they feel better. Sometimes it goes on for longer. So sometimes there's that waiting period. And so I think for a lot of parents, it's just hard to say my kid's really struggling and to kind of reach out for that support.
Yeah, that would be hard to admit that my kid is struggling, and that this could be a phase, but it could not, and you are afraid to pull the trigger too soon. But also, I think it's better to prevent a lot of this rather than react to it when it is a substantial problem. And a lot of mental health can be managed quicker and more efficiently if it's proactively, worked through rather than at the tail end. So I think that what you're saying is really important too, of just call someone that has been through this, or call a therapist or someone you trust, or get a book and just kind of decide like what is normal and what is not normal.
Right, because the reality is you could come in for a few sessions and we recognize that everything's fine, and you go back to life as usual, or we really put in a lot of support and help your kid out regardless.
Yeah, in your experience, can therapy be brief in terms of school refusal?
It can, and I think again it depends on the reason, I think it depends on the motivation, and I think it depends on the type of support that they have. So I think just like the anxiety is very individualized, so can therapy be really individualized, so it just kind of depends on all those factors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I know at Simply Be we've seen brief solution-focused therapy, which is how do we stop the behaviors in the morning and get them to school, and then the school has good supports in place, and that's really effective, and that can be brief. It can also go a little bit longer if we kind of whack-a-mole, where we manage and help with the school refusal piece, but then anxiety pops up for sleeping, or they start to be unable to focus on their homework. So one goal can be achieved, and then a second goal gets created because it's a bit of a whack-a-mole. Because anxiety can creep into different places of someone's life and kind of create that, and so the therapy might take a couple more months or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think anxiety is like our protector, and so we remove the protections, like, oh, I have to find a different way to protect myself. And so that's, like you're saying, that's where we kind of get the whack.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like the anxiety is protecting us from what we perceive as like a threat out in the world. So if we don't go to school, that's really where we think we're going to be safe, is at home. But then we start to go to school and we start to think that it's safe because someone's going to break into our home. Like anxiety can migrate into different fears for kids. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we see that a lot. I think normal too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I think the great thing is that with mental health and insurance, mental health is accessible now. So what people struggled with 10, 20, 30 years ago, because there wasn't mental health services, they don't have to continue to struggle with that. So the resources are there, and of course, we want to be one of them. Right. So yeah. Well, thank you for this. I know that there are people watching who have learned a ton, and if anyone has more questions, they can contact us at Simply Be at 224-424-0432. And they can always email us at assist@simplybe.net, and always reach out to me personally at audrey@simplybe.net to answer questions. So thank you. Bye, everyone.